They handed me a logistics badge, then laughed when I wore my uniform. My sister posed for photos like she ran the ceremony, and my mother joked I was too sensitive. But when the military Humvee pulled up outside, everything stopped. A Pentagon liaison stepped out, carrying a sealed letter with one name on it, mine. "Hi, I'm Rachel, just a quiet soldier they once overlooked. But that day, I was the only one chosen to receive the colonel's final medal. They had to sit in silence and watch." Before we dive into the story, let me learn a bit about you. If you're a charming lady, please leave the number 1 in the comments. And if you're a dashing gentleman, leave the number 2. This way, I can send you a special greeting. Now, let's start the story together. The phone rang just as I was sorting inventory reports on my kitchen table, which doubled as my desk most days. I let it buzz twice before answering. I already knew it would be her. "Colonel Marsh's memorial is next week," my mother said without greeting. "Erica's going. You should too." Not an invitation, just an assignment wrapped in that too sweet tone she used when she needed something done but didn't want to sound like she did. I leaned back in the chair, the edge creaking under me. "Where is it being held?" I asked, though I already knew. Fayetteville wasn't big, and there were only so many places a man like Colonel Marsh could be honored properly. "At St. Mark's, Saturday morning," she said, then quickly added, "You'll come, won't you?" Her voice carried that familiar mix of presumption and guilt. It was never really a question, not when it came from her. I said I'd think about it, then ended the call before the silence turned hostile. Later that evening, I stood in front of my closet staring at the garment bag tucked between a windbreaker and an old winter coat I hadn't needed since Colorado. My uniform hung inside, clean but softened from years of wear. The creases weren't sharp anymore, but it still looked like me, at least the version of me that had once stood at attention under desert sun, taking quiet orders and keeping steadier men from falling apart. I laid the jacket across my bed, smoothing the fabric with the side of my hand. A small tear near the sleeve had been patched, barely visible now. I ironed it slowly, careful not to scald the edges. Some things deserved quiet effort. Colonel Marsh had always noticed that in people who rushed, who prepared, who stood back and watched before acting. On my last visit to the VA hospital, he had smiled when I brought coffee without asking how he took it. "You were the only one," he said, "who didn't need noise to command a room." I hadn't cried then. I still hadn't. But something about the way the steam from the iron curled into the air made my eyes blur. My apartment was small, just one bedroom and a view of the parking lot. Stacked storage bins lined one wall, leftovers from years of moving between assignments. I never did fully unpack, even after discharge. I told myself it was practicality, but maybe I just didn't know how to stay. After work the next day, I found the forwarded email sitting in my inbox. Subject line: Marsh Memorial Program plus details. I clicked it open. The program was attached as a PDF. I scrolled slowly, reading through the list of names under special acknowledgments and family guests. I expected not to be listed under family. I hadn't expected not to be listed at all. Erica's name was there. So was our parents'. Even the woman who used to lead Sunday school at our church had a mention. I scrolled again. No Rachel Langley. My hands hovered over the trackpad. I reread the document twice, then checked the email again, just to make sure. Maybe my name was somewhere else, buried deeper. It wasn't. I closed the laptop slowly, letting the screen dim on its own. Then I reached for my mug, lukewarm now, and stood by the window. Outside, the sky was heavy with the kind of gray that didn't threaten rain, just reminded you how long winter could linger. A neighbor's dog barked in the distance, but it was muffled by the pain. Why invite me at all if I wasn't supposed to be seen? I took a sip from the mug and didn't taste the tea. My reflection in the glass looked faded, softened by the late light. Not erased, but easy to miss. I thought about how many times that had been true, not just with the memorial, but all the small ways my name didn't make the list. The missed birthdays, the skipped holidays, the basic training graduation where no one showed up. When I'd texted my mom a picture of me in uniform, she'd responded, "Nice. Send one without the hat?" I hadn't saved the message, but I remembered it, word for word. I pressed my palm to the window, letting the coolness sink in. Some people live their whole lives trying to be seen. I used to be one of them. But lately, I'd started wondering if peace wasn't about being noticed. It was about not needing to be. Still, I couldn't help asking myself, if they didn't want me there to be seen, why had they asked me to come? The church doors were polished to the point I could see myself before I even touched the handle. I paused there, just a second longer than I needed, as if my reflection might say something first. Inside, the smell of lilies hung in the air, thick, sweet, overdone. White petals lined the ends of each pew. At the front, the honor guard rehearsed their formation with practiced silence. Their movements reminded me of the motor pool drills back in Kandahar, precise, quiet, never meant to draw attention, just like I had been. I adjusted the collar of my uniform. It sat higher than I remembered, or maybe my shoulders weren't used to holding it like they used to. No one glanced my way when I entered, which didn't surprise me. I'd been the kind of soldier who stayed back while others got medals pinned in front of cameras. Support isn't glamorous, I'd been told once, but someone has to stand back. That stuck with me more than any commendation ever did. "Name?" a man asked, glancing up from a clipboard. His voice was smooth but clipped, like he'd been trained to stay pleasant under pressure. "Rachel Langley," I said. He paused, looked down, flipped a page, then looked again. "I don't see—" He hesitated, glancing toward the inner vestibule, then back at me. "You're not listed under the program or family seating, but we could use help at the refreshment table, if you're willing." I nodded once. No point arguing. Not here. Not with someone who was just doing a job. The man, Marcus Bell, according to his name tag, offered a small, almost apologetic smile. He pointed toward the back hallway, where the church kitchen and service area connected to the fellowship hall. I walked slowly, my boots making the faintest echo against the stone floor. A few volunteers were arranging bottled water and stacked paper cups near the far wall. I picked up a crate without being asked. No one thanked me. I didn't need them to. That's when I heard the familiar voice. "Rachel," Erica chirped, sweeping into the hallway like she'd just stepped off a runway instead of a sidewalk. Her hair was pulled into a glossy bun, her dress a deep plum that somehow made her look more expensive than somber. "Glad you made it," she said, voice sugary. "Uniform suits you. Very symbolic." She didn't wait for a response. Just smiled, tilted her head, and turned as our parents walked up behind her. Dad's eyes moved from my sleeves to my boots. "At least Erica didn't come home in combat boots," he muttered, half smirking. Mom laughed, a soft rehearsed sound that didn't reach her eyes. "Raymond," she said, lightly touching his arm, like that made the jab more charming. I stayed quiet. That had always been my role. Fill the silence when needed, hold it when not. The rest of the hour passed in slow stretches. People filtered in. Some wore uniforms. Others came dressed in their best Southern black, the kind bought once and worn for every funeral after. I refilled cups, rearranged napkins. At one point, someone asked me where the restrooms were. I told them, and they nodded without really looking at me. Near the entrance, Erica posed for a photo beside the memorial table. A large portrait of Colonel Marsh stood in the center, flanked by 2 flags and a display of his service awards. She smiled in that way that stretched the lips but never softened the eyes. Her phone camera clicked once, twice. I didn't go near the table. I didn't need a photo. I had real memories, quiet ones, unshared. Then came the moment that pulled me fully into view. A guest, someone I didn't recognize, walked past holding a plate of cookies. She stopped, turned back, and held out a small yellow microfiber cloth. "You missed a spot on the welcome banner," she said, motioning toward the front vestibule where a navy blue vinyl sign hung across the inner arch. I looked at her. looked at the cloth, took it without a word. I didn't wipe the banner because it needed cleaning. I wiped it because I wanted to remember her face, the curve of her mouth, the tone of her voice, flat, unaware, dismissive. And I smiled, not because I agreed, but because sometimes a smile is the sharpest thing you can offer when words aren't worth the effort. As I stood there, cloth in hand, I caught sight of Marcus Bell again. He stood near the side aisle, clipboard pressed against his chest. He watched me for a beat too long, then looked away, like he wasn't sure whether to speak or stay out of it. I didn't hold it against him. Most people don't know what to do with someone who's half in, half out of the room, and that was the thing. I wasn't angry, not really. I was just aware. Awareness has a way of settling deeper than outrage. You stop trying to fit where you're not invited. You start noticing the small ways people place you, behind tables, off lists, beneath glances, and you remember. Everyone smiled at Erica, wide, approving smiles. They touched her arm lightly, laughed at her stories, nodded as if they knew her from somewhere important. I stood nearby, close enough to feel the warmth of their attention, but never quite in its light. Even when I stood directly under the chandelier, the spotlight curved around me like I wasn't there at all. The main hall had filled quickly. Every chair lined up in perfect rows. Marcia's portrait, framed in oak and flanked by flags, watched the crowd with a kind of quiet dignity. Beneath it, a triangularly folded flag lay on a velvet-draped table beside a polished metal plaque. I kept my eyes on that plaque. It was easier than watching everyone else pretend I was furniture. Somewhere near the back, the trumpet player rehearsed again, a slow, somber note drifting through the stone archways like a sigh too heavy to be held. Diane moved through the crowd like she belonged there. She always did, especially at events with catered drinks and the chance to name drop. I watched her smile at a man in a pressed navy suit, her voice soft but sharp. Yes, Erica was such a comfort to Everett during his last months, helped coordinate everything, down to the ribbon color. Ribbon color? Marsh had barely tolerated ceremony, but I supposed she needed something to say, something that made Erica's presence feel earned. Erica stood nearby, nodding gracefully. Her heels clicked softly as she stepped closer to the memorial table, laying a single lily down like she knew cameras might be watching. I stood still. No one introduced me. No one asked. A staffer walked by and paused beside me. "Here," he said quickly, handing me a plastic badge on a lanyard. It read, "Staff, Logistics." The font was too bold, like it was meant to be seen from far away, so no one mistook me for someone who belonged at the front. I slipped it over my neck, fingers cold against the plastic. Not long after, Diane caught sight of me and raised her eyebrows like I was the surprise she hadn't ordered. "Oh, Rach!" she called across the room, loud enough to draw a few glances. "Don't take things so personally. You've always been so sensitive." A beat passed, then laughter. Not cruel, just casual, dismissive. The kind of laughter that didn't need to shout to leave a mark. I didn't respond, didn't flinch. I let my hands rest calmly in front of me, fingers laced. That was my armor. Stillness. Stillness told them I hadn't heard, even if I had. I shifted my weight, eyes grazing the edges of the crowd. One man nodded at Erica's introduction. "She really has her life together," I heard him say. I didn't realize she was so close to the colonel. Close? Erica hadn't visited Marsh in years. She used to call him Mom's weird charity case. I once offered to correct her. Then I decided silence was better than spending energy on someone determined to stay surface deep. Someone near the center turned around slightly. Her voice wasn't loud, but in the hush of the room, it carried. Wasn't she the one who dropped out of school for the army? I didn't need to see who said it. That tone had followed me for years, and they always said it the same way, the one who dropped out, as if service was the fallback plan for people who couldn't make it elsewhere. Never mind that I finished school after my deployment. that I'd built systems overseas that saved more time and resources than any textbook ever taught me. To them, I was still the girl who left the graduation line and put on boots instead of heels. I let the words pass through me, let them settle. But something in my chest curled inward, like it had hurt enough for one lifetime. From across the room, Marcus Bell glanced over. He had been refilling the guestbook pens, but his eyes lingered on me longer than they should have. Like maybe he'd heard it too. Maybe he wasn't sure what to do with the version of me standing in full dress uniform, pinned with years of experience he couldn't see. I didn't give him anything to work with, just nodded, slow, controlled. Sometimes, silence was the only thing that made people look twice. The trumpet outside played a single long note, lower this time. People quieted naturally, like a breeze had passed through the room, pulling the energy down to a pause. And then I heard it, a sound I hadn't expected. Not the trumpet, not the murmurs, not a voice. It was the low, distinct growl of an engine, steady, deliberate, too smooth to be mistaken for a delivery van or staff vehicle. I turned slowly toward the back of the room. The noise didn't rise. It settled deeper, like presence, like arrival. And I knew before anyone else that something was about to change. I didn't need to turn around. That sound, low, unhurried, absolute, moved through the walls like a declaration, a hum that didn't ask for attention. It expected it. Somewhere beyond the stained glass and stone arches, a military Humvee had pulled to a stop. Inside the church, conversation slowed to a ripple. People turned their heads, not all at once, just gradually, like something had shifted, and no one wanted to admit they noticed first. From where I stood, I could see Marcus Bell pause mid-step near the front pew. His clipboard lowered slightly. His posture stiffened, like someone had called his name without speaking. The side doors opened. Sunlight poured in. It reached across the aisle like an outstretched arm, touching the edge of Marcia's photograph before dimming against the carpet. Lieutenant Colonel Joseph Healy stepped into view. He wore a formal dress uniform, clean and sharp, but not overdone. The kind of man who knew his place in the hierarchy, but never needed to flex it. Tucked beneath one arm was a flat black case. In the other, a sealed envelope bearing a silver insignia I recognized instantly. Marcus stepped forward to greet him. Their conversation was hushed, just a few clipped exchanges before Marcus turned, cleared his throat, and faced the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice low but clear, "we've just received a final communication from Colonel Everett Marsh's personal military liaison." Every eye in the room turned toward the front. Marcus opened the envelope slowly, carefully, as if what he held might alter something permanent. Maybe it already had. In accordance with Colonel Marsh's written instruction, a final commendation is to be presented today, not to the family, not to a foundation, but to a single individual. A pause. Not dramatic. Just enough space for the weight of that sentence to settle in people's minds. Marcus looked down again, then up. "The name," he said steady, "is Rachel Langley." It didn't echo, but the silence afterward did. I didn't move at first. Around me, I heard air shift. Someone drew in a sharp breath. Another gasped audibly. Erica, caught mid-gesture near the aisle, froze with her hand still half lifted, fingers curled slightly. Our mother, Diane, sat holding a coffee cup that didn't quite make it back to her lips. She set it down with a faint click. I stepped forward, not quickly. Not like someone claiming a prize. My stride was even, anchored. Each step tapped lightly against the floor, measured not for effect, but because that's how I'd learned to walk in rooms where eyes waited for cracks. As I reached the front, Lieutenant Colonel Healy offered a small nod. He opened the case in silence. Inside lay a medal I'd seen only once before, years ago, pinned to the lapel of a man Marsh had described as the best we ever had, and no one knew it. It looked different in this light, smaller, heavier. Healy spoke for the first time, his voice even and respectful. This commendation was personally assigned by Colonel Marsh prior to his passing. He noted it as his last formal directive. He lifted the medal with both hands and extended it toward me. He wanted you to carry this forward. I took it. Not with shaking fingers, not with wide eyes, just steadily, like I'd been carrying it for years and only now had a name to go with it. I didn't turn around immediately. I let the moment breathe. There was no applause. No one stood. But the air had shifted. I could feel it on my skin like the moment before a storm breaks. Quiet, charged, unsure. When I finally faced the room, I saw it clearly. Marcus Bell standing still, no longer fidgeting. His eyes weren't questioning anymore. They were measuring, watching me not like a volunteer or a misplaced name on a guest list, but like someone who had become undeniable. Erica stood by the aisle, her lips parted slightly, as if about to speak but unsure what word would land safely. Diane's expression was unreadable, her hands folded tightly in her lap, knuckles pale. She wasn't blinking. I didn't gloat, didn't scan the crowd for reactions. I didn't need to. There's a kind of silence that doesn't scream. It doesn't need to. It simply stands, and the room rearranges around it. I didn't bow. I didn't thank them. I just looked out at a room that no longer knew what to do with me. And I let it sit in that discomfort, because I'd sat in theirs for far too long. There was no applause, not at first, just silence, the thick, stretched kind that falls over a room when something shifts and no one knows how to name it yet. And in that silence, I felt something settle. It said more than any standing ovation could have. I stepped back from the podium, medal still resting in my palm. The ribbon, navy and silver, hung limp between my fingers. For a moment, I didn't move, letting the quiet breathe a little longer. Then, somewhere in the third row, a single pair of hands began to clap. Not fast, not eager, just steady. Then another, then a few more. It wasn't thunderous, it wasn't rehearsed. It was the sound of realization trickling outward. I didn't look toward the source. I just listened. The flags above me stirred slightly, caught in the soft breath of the ceiling vents. Even fabric seemed to acknowledge what words hadn't. As I turned to leave the stage, my eyes swept briefly across the front row. Erica sat with her phone in her lap, screen glowing faintly. She wasn't looking at me. Her fingers moved fast, too fast for comfort, likely composing a caption, a narrative, a version of the story where she still made sense. Diane sat stiffly beside her, blazer perfectly fitted, shoulders square. She adjusted the collar like she was putting on armor, but her eyes didn't lift. She stared straight ahead, mouth set in a line I recognized from childhood, the line she wore when someone else got credit for something she didn't understand. I walked slowly down the side aisle. No one reached out. No one blocked my path. In fact, as I moved, people parted. Just a few inches at first, then more, like water giving way to a current it hadn't noticed before. Marcus stood near the rear pew. No clipboard this time. Just his hands clasped in front of him, and a kind of quiet respect in his posture. As I passed him, he leaned slightly and spoke in a low voice only I could hear. "You weren't forgotten," he said. "You were just ahead of their understanding." I didn't stop, just nodded once. The metal in my hand wasn't heavy, not anymore. I moved into the side hallway where the sound of the gathering faded behind me, replaced by the soft echo of my shoes against polished tile. It reminded me of the nights in Afghanistan when I walked the perimeter without backup. Quiet steps, steady breath, watching the horizon even when nothing stirred. I had defused a standoff once without raising a weapon, just by standing where no one expected me to. Marsh called it leadership through presence. This felt like that. I reached the end of the corridor and paused near the exit. The glass door reflected the faint blush of late afternoon sun, my own shape blurred against it, backlit and calm. Not heroic, not grand, just here. Inside, I could still hear voices, muffled, scattered, uncertain. Erica was likely rewriting reality in real time. Diane would offer explanations wrapped in tone, and maybe they'd succeed for a little while, but the room had already seen what it needed to. I looked down at the metal again, ran my thumb gently across the engraving. There was no inscription beyond the name, but I didn't need one. The weight wasn't in the metal. It was in the way people stepped aside. I pushed the door open and stepped into the sun. It wasn't hot, just warm enough to cut the edge of the earlier chill. The pavement had cooled, the sky gone soft around the edges. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was leaving anything behind. No one stopped me. No one needed to. I'd already passed through everything that once held me. The next morning, the sun reached the kitchen floor before my phone did. I let it stay there, face down, glowing faintly with notifications I didn't ask for. Outside, the world moved quietly. A dog barked 2 streets over. A truck rumbled past, but not loudly. Nothing urgent pressed in. The coffee maker let out its final sigh, and the scent filled the apartment. Warm, earthy, familiar. I moved slowly, barefoot across the tile, pouring a cup and leaning against the counter like it was a Sunday I didn't need to account for. Soft, classical music played from the little speaker tucked near the window. Something without words, without rhythm, demanding attention. It had been a long time since my mornings felt like they belonged to me. I picked up my phone, finally, not because I needed to, but because I was ready. The first thing that caught my eye was a photo. Erica, framed beside Marcia's portrait. Her caption read, "An honor to celebrate a life of service. May we carry his memory forward with grace." I scrolled once. Another photo, this one from farther back in the church. She stood near the center. I was visible too, near the side, blurred but unmistakably there. The comments came in clusters. "So proud of you, Erica." "Wait, who was that soldier?" "Was that your sister? She looks so strong." I didn't reply. I didn't screenshot anything. I just turned off the screen and set the phone back down beside the coffee. 10 minutes later, a new buzz, then another. Text from Diane. "Can we talk?" Another, this time from Erica. "You made your point. Hope it was worth it." I deleted Erica's message without opening it. Diane's, I left unread. Some things didn't need responses. Some endings didn't need sound. On the windowsill above the sink, between a small rosemary bush and a drooping basil plant, I placed the medal. It didn't gleam like it had under the church lights. It just sat, whole, honest, not a trophy, a marker, something that meant you were here, you mattered, even when they didn't look. I rinsed the mug, dried it slowly, then wandered outside. The morning air touched my skin with a gentle firmness, neither hot nor cold, just present. The grass was cool beneath my feet. The garden I'd started planting last spring was beginning to stretch again, lavender climbing low along the edge, a few tough marigolds stubborn in the corner. I stepped into it without shoes, letting the soil press against my heels. The sky above was pale, barely colored, like a canvas waiting for the day to finish drawing itself. There were no apologies coming. I knew that. But there were also no shadows left chasing me. No rooms I needed to prove myself in, no names I needed to earn. And that was something. My bracelet, it had been Marcia's once, rested against my wrist, worn but intact. I ran my thumb along the inside, led where none have cleared a path. I didn't need the words anymore, but they were there, like an echo that stopped needing to shout. I went back inside. The apartment felt still, but not empty. Later, after breakfast, I opened my laptop. The cursor blinked on a blank document, and I began to write. Not a report, not a memo, not something for command or community recognition, just for me. The first line came without hesitation. This is not a story of silence. It's a story of what happens after. I sat with that for a while. Then I looked back out the window where the garden stretched quietly and without permission, where growth didn't need applause. I didn't need to be seen, not anymore, but they did, and that was enough. The garden didn't ask questions. It just grew, quietly, stubbornly, like it always meant to. And in that stillness, I found something I'd been chasing for years. Not validation, not applause, just peace. Sometimes the loudest strength is in knowing when not to fight. We spend so much time proving we belong that we forget. Real worth doesn't need an audience, just a place to be fully ourselves. Family may not always understand us, but grace can begin where explanation ends. If this story speaks to something in you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. You're not alone, and your quiet presence might be just what someone else needs to feel seen today.